under the fading sunset. The Sunset Oasis rest stop sits quietly beside Interstate 70, where old trucks line up like battle-weary steeds resting after a long day. The air carries the scent of burnt coffee, mingling with the distant rumble of engines, a familiar symphony of the American Midwest. Shadows of people move silently in the flickering light of the neon open sign hanging on the glass door, pulsing like the heartbeat of a place trying to cling to life in the desolate land. Inside, the small diner is warm, with worn red vinyl seats and wallpaper with floral patterns from the 70s. A few truck drivers sit scattered around, their eyes fixed on the menu or steaming bowls of soup. No one bothers to look up when the door chimes ring. In the corner by the main entrance, John Carver sits alone, his thin frame draped in an old flannel jacket, his sharp eyes hidden behind silver glasses. In front of him is his third cup of coffee for the day and a trucker's map spread out, lines hastily drawn with a red pen. His calloused hands glide slowly over the map, as if searching for something far beyond the roads drawn on paper. John is a stranger around here. Almost every night, he stops by Sunset Oasis after long hauls, a habit ingrained in his bones from over 2 decades of driving. But no one knows much about him beyond his name and the brief greeting he usually tosses out with a faint smile. To them, he's just an old trucker, a guy who likes to sit alone and never causes any trouble. But tonight, there's something different in the air, a heavy silence, like the calm before a storm. Emma Grayson, the young waitress with her blonde hair tied up high and a constant smile, approached John with a coffee pot in hand. "Need a refill, John?" she asked, her voice as gentle as a fall breeze. He looked up, a rare warm flickering in his eyes. "Thanks, Emma. Your coffee is always better than anywhere else," he replied, pushing his cup forward for her to fill. Emma giggled. "You say that every time." "And I mean it every time," John responded, his voice steady but sincere. Outside, the light of the day fades away, giving way to the darkness that envelopes the parking lot. The sound of the truck's engine grows fainter, replaced by a new sound, the roar of 2 large motorcycles tearing through the silence. They storm into the lot at a ferocious speed, their straight exhaust pipes resonating powerfully as if to intimidate anyone who dares to notice. John doesn't lift his head from the map, but through the reflection on the shiny steel coffee machine, he sees every detail clearly. 2 burly men dismounting their bikes, their shiny black leather jackets adorned with patches from the Black Vipers MC a name that's making drivers on I-70 highway shiver. Emma froze for a moment, her hand trembling slightly as she held the coffee mug while whispering, "Oh no, it's them. Sarah warned us about these guys." John put his pen down, his voice low but firm. "Stay calm, Emma. Just keep working like normal." She nodded, tried to regain her composure, but her eyes couldn't hide the fear as the door swung open and the 2 men walked in. The guy in the lead, tall with a scruffy gray beard and eyes as cold as ice, had the nickname Sledge embroidered on his jacket. He strutted with an arrogant swagger, his heavy boots thudding on the wooden floor, making the whole place shake. Following him was a younger, scrawny guy with a snake tattoo wrapped around his neck, known as Viper, as declared by the patch on his chest. Sledge's horse laugh echoed as he scanned the bar. "This place is cozy, huh?" he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "A cute little nest, right, Viper?" Viper smirked, leaning against the counter, his eyes hungrily watching Emma as she tried to avoid his gaze. "I like this place," he said, his voice drawn out and menacing. "Maybe we should make it ours." The atmosphere in the diner suddenly grew heavy. An older trucker at a nearby table gripped his fork tighter, but his eyes remained fixed on the table, not daring to speak up. A family of 3, a father, a mother, and their young daughter huddled together, the father pulling the little girl close to him. Sarah Coleman, the owner of Sunset Oasis, stepped out from the kitchen with a stern yet calm expression. Her petite frame couldn't hide the fierceness in her eyes. "Welcome to Sunset Oasis," she said, her voice steady. "What can I get for you guys?" She stood behind the counter, her right hand subtly sliding down to where John knew she kept a baseball bat, not for sports, but to protect her bar. Viper smirked, leaning closer to the counter. "What's the delay? Hand over all the cash in the register. Let me see how much you guys have." Sledge put his hand on Viper's shoulder. laughing loudly but with no warmth in his eyes. "Relax, little brother. We just want to talk business." He turned to Sarah, his voice lowering, carrying an implicit threat. "This stretch is under new management now. The Black Vipers are expanding their territory, and we're here to discuss the monthly protection fee." Sarah kept her expression unchanged. "This is a family restaurant. We don't need protection." Sledge smirked, stepping closer. "Everyone needs protection, little sister. Accidents happen all the time. Machines break down, goods get lost, customers have accidents. We just want to help you avoid those things." John remained still, his eyes glued to the map, but all his senses were on high alert. He recognized this pattern. He'd seen it dozens of times back when he was in the Marines. Small gangs like the Black Vipers always started by spreading fear, testing how far they could push the limits before revealing their true purpose, turning this place into a drug trafficking hub. Through the reflection in the coffee machine, he saw Viper approaching the family's table, deliberately bumping into the little girl's chair. She shrieked, clinging tightly to her mom, while the dad clenched his fist but didn't dare do anything. That's when John spoke up, his voice ringing out calm but sharp, slicing through the suffocating silence. She said she didn't need it. The whole bar seemed to hold its breath. Sledge turned around slowly, noticing John for the first time. "What's this?" he said, stepping forward, his towering figure looming over the counter. "Do we have a hero here?" He leaned in, his breath reeking of cigarette smoke hitting John's face. "This doesn't concern you, old man." John looked up, his calm eyes meeting Sledge's gaze head-on. "You guys are making it my problem," he said, his voice steady, without a hint of waver. In that moment, the atmosphere in Sunset Oasis shifted from a fearful silence to something more tense, sharper, like a blade just drawn from its sheath. The air in Sunset Oasis froze as John Carver's voice cut through Sledge's arrogance like a sharp knife. The tall man with the gray beard paused, his cold eyes narrowing as if assessing the prey that had just spoken up. He tilted his head, a twisted smile appearing on his suntanned face. "What did you just say, old man?" Sledge growled, taking another step, so his massive frame completely overshadowed where John was sitting. Viper, standing near the family's table, turned around, his right hand silently sliding down to his waist, where a sturdy dagger was concealed beneath his leather jacket. John remained unfazed. He slowly placed his coffee cup on the counter, his calm movement almost provocative. "I told you guys you're making this my business," he repeated, his voice calm but carrying a weight that couldn't be ignored. His eyes locked onto Sledge, showing no fear or anger, just the certainty of someone who had faced far worse situations many times before. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Emma step back behind the counter, her hand gripping the coffee pot like a flimsy shield. Sarah stood still, her hand still under the counter near the baseball bat, her gaze shifting from worry to alertness. Sledge burst into laughter, the hoarse sound echoing like metal scraping against stone. "You know, I like guys who think they're heroes," he said, leaning in closer, his breath heavy with the smell of cigarettes hitting John's face. "But old man, this isn't a Hollywood movie. You're asking for trouble." He straightened up, turning to Viper with a nod. Viper smirked, stepping closer to John, his skinny fingers twirling the knife he had just pulled out, the steel blade gleaming under bar's lights. "You picked the wrong day to be a good guy," Viper said, his voice shrill and threatening. He stopped a few steps away from John, the blade just inches from the air in front of him. "Maybe we should teach you how to keep your mouth shut." A few patrons in the bar started to whisper, but no one dared to move. The father in the family pulled his little girl closer, whispering something to calm her down, while the mother covered her child's eyes, her face pale as a ghost. But John still didn't react the way they expected. He didn't stand up, didn't flinch, and didn't even bother to look at Viper's knife. Instead, he took a sip of his coffee, set the cup down with a soft clink, and then looked straight at Sledge. "You guys have two choices," he said, his voice as steady as if he were reading a menu. "One, you walk out of here, get in your car, and find somewhere else to cause trouble. Two, you try what you're thinking about, and we'll see how that ends for everyone." John's words were like a stone thrown into a still lake, sending ripples of surprise across its surface. Viper stopped twirling his knife, his eyes narrowing, his hand gripping the handle tightly as if weighing his options. Sledge, for the first time, seemed to lose some of his confidence. He looked at John more closely, noticing something in his posture, the way he sat. Back straight, shoulders relaxed but ready, his hands resting on the counter without a tremble. That wasn't the demeanor of a regular truck driver. It was the demeanor of someone who had walked through battlefields, who had faced dangers far greater than the Black Vipers. "Who do you think you are, ordering us around?" Sledge roared, but his voice now carried a hint of doubt. He took another step forward, trying to regain the upper hand. "You think you can change anything by yourself? The Black Vipers control this stretch, and no one, not even you, can stop them." John finally stood up slowly, as if just to stretch his legs after a long day. He was taller than they thought, and though skinny, he carried a hidden strength that couldn't be ignored. "I know who you are," he said, his voice deep but clear. "Black Vipers MC, coming up from Nebraska, try and expand your territory, starting by intimidating at a few rest stops, then extorting protection money, and then using this place as a hub for contraband. I've seen these tricks a dozen times before, but this time you picked the wrong place to start." Sledge blinked, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before being masked by a forced smile. "You know a lot, old man," he said, trying to keep his voice mocking. "But knowing a lot doesn't mean you'll survive tonight." He signaled to Viper, but the younger man hesitated, his eyes fixed on John as if trying to read him. "Don't try it," John said, his eyes fixed on Sledge. "Leave now and it all ends here. Otherwise, I promise you, this will be the last time you walk into Sunset Oasis in one piece." His words were not a threat. They were a declaration, firm and cold as a death sentence. Sledge stood still for a long moment, the air tense like a guitar string about to snap. Finally, he stepped back, pulling Viper with him. "Let's go," he growled, his eyes still locked on John. "This isn't over, old man. We'll be back." He pointed at him, then turned and walked out, his heavy boots thudding on the floor like war drums. As the motorcycle's roar faded into the distance, everyone in the diner breathed a sigh of relief. The father in the family stood up, trembling as he approached John. "Thank you, man," he said, his voice choked up. "I don't know what would have happened if—" John raised his hand to stop him, gently but firmly. "Nothing's going to happen to your family. Not here." Sarah stepped out from behind the counter, her hand still gripping the baseball bat tightly. "They'll come back, won't they?" she asked, her voice low but firm. John nodded, turning back to his map. "Yeah, with more people. But we'll be ready." Emma brought over a fresh cup of coffee, her hand still shaking but a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "What are we going to do, John?" she asked. John looked out the window, where the taillights of two motorcycles faded into the darkness. "We'll show them they picked the wrong bar to mess with," he said, his voice low but full of determination. The roar of the two large motorcycles fades into the distance, leaving Sunset Oasis in a suffocating silence, as if the entire rest stop was holding its breath, waiting for something to explode. The neon open sign flickers weakly outside the glass door, reflecting onto the now empty parking lot, with only a few trucks standing silently like mute witnesses. Inside, the air still hangs heavy with a mix of tension, sweat, cold coffee, and a lingering fear from the encounter with Sledge and Viper, the Black Vipers MC. John Carver returned to his usual spot at the corner of the bar, his hands slowly folding the truck map, each crease neat as if it were a ritual he had performed 1,000 times. But his eyes were sharp and calm, never leaving the window where the darkness had swallowed the red taillights of the two bikers. He knew they would be back, not tomorrow, but maybe even tonight, with more people, more aggressive. That's how gangs like the Black Vipers operate. They test the waters, sow fear, and then crush anyone who dares to resist. Emma Grayson stood behind the counter, her small hand still trembling as she wiped up a spill of coffee on the wooden surface. She glanced at John, her eyes filled with both gratitude and confusion. "John, how could you do that?" she asked, her voice low as if afraid someone outside might hear. "I mean confronting them. Most people would just bow their heads." John took a sip of coffee from the fresh cup Emma had just brought over, his eyes briefly distant. "It's not the first time I've dealt with guys like that," he replied, his voice steady but enough to make Emma stop wiping the counter and look at him intently. Sarah Coleman stepped out from behind, the baseball bat still in her hand, though now it looked more like a decoration than a weapon. She sat down in the chair next to John, her dark brown eyes shining with determination, but also full of worry. "They won't let this go, John," she said, her voice low but firm. "I heard from some drivers that the Black Vipers have been trashing other rest stops along Interstate 70 over the past few months. A place near Lincoln was burned to ground just because the owner refused to pay up. If you hadn't spoken up earlier, they might have trashed this place too." John nodded, not surprised. "I know," he said, unconsciously twirling his coffee mug. "They're not just after money. They want to control and turn Sunset Oasis into a stopover for contraband. I've seen this before in places far beyond this highway." Sarah furrowed her brow, leaning in closer. "What do you mean, seen this before? You're a truck driver, right? Or is there something else I don't know?" Sarah's question hung in the air, and for the first time, John revealed a faint smile, not a joyful one, but the kind that comes with recalling something bitter. He set his coffee cup down, turned to look at Sarah and Emma, the two women now waiting for an answer that would not only explain his recent actions, but also reveal his true self. "I used to be a Marine," he said, his voice deep as if recounting an old tale. "Not the regular kind. I was part of Force Recon specializing in infiltration, gathering intel, and taking out stuff that guys like Sledge and Viper could only dream of." Emma's jaw dropped, her blue eyes wide open. "Navy SEALs? Like in the movies? Have you fought terrorists or something?" John let out a soft chuckle, the first one tonight, but the sound quickly faded. "Not exactly terrorists," he replied. "Most of the time, I hunted down guys like the Black Vipers, but bigger, more dangerous. I worked with a special ops anti-drug unit, tracking gangs and cartels from Texas all the way down to South America. Once, we took down a smuggling ring that spanned 3 countries, busting up a network worth hundreds of millions, but it came at a cost." Sarah tilted her head, her gaze sharpening. "What price?" John was silent for a moment, his fingers tapping lightly on the counter, as if counting memories he'd rather forget. "Lost some good friends," he finally said, his voice dropping, heavy. "People who believed in me, followed me into places no one should ever go. When I left the military, I thought I'd left all of it behind the war, the death, guys like Sledge. But it seems they always find a way to pull me back in." The space in Sunset Oasis suddenly grew quieter. Even the whispers of the remaining drivers stopped. Emma set down her coffee mug and stepped closer. "So why are you here, John? Why not take a break somewhere peaceful instead of driving a truck and facing guys like that?" John looked at her, his eyes no longer cold but showing a hint of remorse. "Because I can't just stand by," he said simply. "When I see guys like them walking, hurting people like you, like Sarah, like that family, I can't pretend I don't see it. Some battles choose you. You don't choose them." Sarah nodded slowly, as if John's words had touched something deep within her. "So, what are you planning to do when they come back?" "Because they will come back. John." I saw the look in Sledge's eyes. He's not the type to give up easily. John turned back to the map, his hand tracing the red lines he had drawn earlier. "We'll be ready," he said, his voice as firm as a vow. "But it won't just be me. If they want to turn Sunset Oasis into a battlefield, they'll have to face all of us." Emma blinked, astonished. "What do you mean? All of us?" John looked up, his gaze sweeping over Emma, Sarah, and then a few drivers who were now listening from a distance. "I'm not here alone," he said. "I know people like me, veterans, drivers, folks who faced this kind of stuff before. I'll call them. Sunset Oasis isn't just a pit stop. It's your home, and I won't let guys like the Black Vipers take it away." Sarah placed a baseball bat on the counter, a gesture as if she had just decided to put her trust in John. "Are you serious, John? Do you think we can stand up against them?" John nodded, his eyes gleaming with a determination that no one in Sunset Oasis had ever seen before. "I don't just think so. I know so. I've taken down guys much bigger than the Black Vipers before. But this time, I need you guys to stand with me." The atmosphere in the diner suddenly shifted from a vague fear to a faint but spreading ray of hope. Emma gave a gentle smile, though still a bit anxious. So, you're not just an old truck driver, huh? John shrugged, a faint smile appearing on his face. I'm still a driver. I just carry a bit of extra experience with me. That's all. Sarah stood up and gently patted John on the shoulder. All right, Carver. If you've chosen this battle, then I'm in too. But you gotta tell me what your plan is. John nodded, his hand unfolding the map again. The plan starts now, he said, his voice deep but full of strength. We'll turn Sunset Oasis into a place where the Black Vipers will regret ever setting foot in. The atmosphere in Sunset Oasis was slowly warming up as the fluorescent lights illuminated faces that had just gone through a shock. John Carver's truck map lay spread out on the counter. The scribbled red lines no longer just a shipping route, but the first draft of a plan against the Black Vipers MC. Emma Grayson stood nearby, her hands no longer trembling, replaced instead by a mix of curiosity and excitement as she looked at John, the man she thought just minutes ago was nothing more than a regular truck driver. Sarah Coleman sat next to him, a new spark of determination in her eyes, her baseball bat now set aside, as if she was ready to fight with something bigger. John looked up from the map, his gaze sweeping across the room from Emma to Sarah, and then to a few drivers who had now left their tables to come closer, curious to hear what he would say next. If the Black Vipers come back, he began, his voice low but clear, they won't just have 2 guys. They'll bring a whole gang of 5, 10, maybe even 20 dudes. They want to crush this place before it becomes a bigger problem. But they don't know that the big problem started the moment they stepped through that door. Sarah nodded, bracing herself against the counter. I believe you, John, but they're more numerous, stronger, and probably armed. We're just a bunch of regular folks, a few drivers, a diner owner, and a waitress who's never thrown a punch in her life. What do you think we can do? Emma chimed in, her voice slightly shaky but determined. Yeah, if you have a plan, John, let us know. I don't want to just stand by when they come back. John gave a faint smile, the kind he rarely showed, not out of joy, but because he realized he wasn't as alone as he had thought. You guys aren't just ordinary people, he said, pointing at Sarah. You had the guts to stand up and protect this place, even knowing they could trash everything. He turned to Emma. You didn't run away, even though you were scared stiff, your hands shaking like crazy. And the rest of you, he nodded towards the drivers listening. I bet some of you have faced trouble before, driven through roads no one else would dare to. We're not as weak as the Black Vipers think. An older driver, with white hair and hands full of scars, spoke up from the back. His name was Big Bill Henderson, a towering guy who had driven every nook and cranny of Interstate 70. I've seen those bikers causing trouble at other joints, Big Bill said, his voice hoarse from smoking. But I've never seen anyone dare confront them head-on like you just did. If you got a plan, count me in. Anyway, I'm sick of those guys thinking of the kings of the road. John nodded at Big Bill, acknowledging the first sign of support from this small crowd. Good, he said, then turned back to the map. The first step is understanding the enemy. The Black Vipers aren't your typical thugs. They're pawns for something bigger. Could be a cartel, could be a cross-state drug network. They choose places like Sunset Oasis because it's the perfect crossroads. Close to the highway, lots of traffic, easy to hide contraband and legal shipments. I've hunted networks like this before, and I know how they think. Emma blinked, still a bit stunned by what John had revealed. So, they don't just want protection money. You mean they're planning to turn this place into something like out of a crime movie? John nodded, tracing a red circle around the location of Sunset Oasis on the map. Exactly. The protection money is just the first step. Then it's drugs, weapons, even human trafficking if they get big enough. I once saw a small diner in New Mexico turn into a distribution hub in just 3 months. When my team and I raided the place, we found tens of millions in contraband hidden under the false floor of the warehouse. Sarah let out a sharp breath, her hands unconsciously clenching into fists. So, they don't just want to trash my place, they want to take it over. John looked straight into her eyes, nodding slowly. That's right, but I won't let that happen. Not here, not to you guys. Big Bill stepped closer, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. Sounds good, Carver, but what are you planning to do? Call the cops? Because I'm telling you, the local police here can't handle a gang like the Black Vipers. I've seen them get bought off as easily as buying a loaf of bread. John shook his head, a sharp glint in his eyes. Not just relying on the police. I've got buddies who are veterans like me. Some now driving trucks, others working in the shadows. They know how to deal with guys like these. I'll call them in. Emma tilted her head. Curious. Your friends? You mean the guys you used to fight with somewhere? John nodded, pulling an old Nokia phone out of his pocket that looked out of place in the smartphone era. Yeah, one used to be a sharpshooter in my team. Now he drives for a company in Colorado. Another was a battlefield doctor. Now he works at a nearby garage. They're not just good at fighting, they know how to win. Sarah stood up straight, her shoulders relaxing as if a weight had been lifted off them. So not only do you have experience, you also have your own little army. John shrugged, a faint smile appearing on his face. Not exactly an army, just people I trust. But if the Black Vipers want to play big, we'll show them the price they'll have to pay. Big Bill chuckled hoarsely, slapping the counter. I like this way of talking. Count me in, Carver. I don't have a gun or anything, but I've got a pretty good punch and a truck that can block the road if needed. John nodded, his gaze shifting to the remaining drivers. Anyone else want to join? I'm not forcing anyone. But if you stay, we'll turn Sunset Oasis into a place where the Black Vipers won't dare to show their faces again. A younger driver, with messy brown hair and bright eyes, steps up. His name is Tommy Reed, a rookie, but gutsy enough not to run when Sledge and Viper walk in. I'm in, Tommy says. I don't have any military experience, but I grew up in the Kansas City slums. I know how to deal with bullies. John looked at Tommy, then Big Bill, then back at Sarah and Emma. So, we got a team now, he said, his voice deep but full of strength. The next step is to get ready. I'll call my guys. Sarah, you call the local sheriff. Hank Larson, I know him. He's clean, not bought off. Emma, you check the windows and doors. We need to know where we're vulnerable. And you guys, he looked at Big Bill and Tommy, get your heads in the game. The Black Vipers will be back soon, and we've got to be ready. Sarah nodded, picking up the phone from the counter. All right, Carver, I trust you. Emma smiled. The first time tonight she actually looked relieved. I'll do it right away, she said, then ran off to check the door. Big Bill and Tommy nodded, starting to discuss who would do what. John sat back with the map, phone in hand, and dialed a number. As the first ring sounded, he looked out the window, where the thick darkness no longer seemed as frightening as before. You picked the wrong guy to mess with, he whispered. Not to anyone in the room, but to those who were preparing to come back. The night sky above Sunset Oasis was as black as ink, with only a few stars peeking to the thick clouds, like silent eyes watching everything below. A cold wind from I-70 blew through, carrying the smell of diesel and dry earth, blending with the faint flickering light of the neon open sign hanging outside the window. Inside the rest stop, fluorescent lights shone on faces that had just found a bit of hope amidst the threatening storm from the Black Vipers' MC. John Carver sat at a counter, his old Nokia phone in hand, having just ended a short but meaningful call. On the other end, the raspy voice of Mike Doc Sullivan, a former battlefield doctor who had fought alongside John to the days of gunfire, rang out, I'm on my way, Carver. Don't let those guys burn the place down before I get there. John gave a faint smile, tucked the phone into his flannel jacket pocket, and turned back to look at the truck map with the red circles he had drawn. Sarah Coleman stood next to him, phone in hand after contacting Police Chief Hank Larson. Hank says he's on his way, she reported, her voice steady but tinged with worry. He knows about the Black Vipers. They've been causing trouble at several spots along Interstate 70 for the past month. But he says the force here is stretched thin, not sure they can handle it if the gang shows up in full force. What do you think, John? John nodded, his eyes fixed on the map. I'm not counting on the police to handle everything. Hank just needs to be here to bear witness and keep things under control if necessary. The fighting part is up to us. Emma Grayson rushed back from the window, her face flushed from checking the entrances. The front door is fine, but the back door is too loose, she said, slightly out of breath, hands on her hips. If they want to break in, they'll definitely go for that. And the windows, the glass is old. One hit and it'll shatter. John nodded, quickly jotting notes on the map with a red pen. Good, Emma. We'll reinforce the back door. Big Bill, can you help with that? Big Bill Henderson, the tall, silver-haired driver with scarred hands, nodded immediately. I'll take care of it. I've got some wooden planks and a roll of steel wire in the truck. I'll turn that door into a steel wall. No one will get through. Tommy Reed, the young driver with messy brown hair, chimed in. I'll help you, Bill. I'm not good at fighting, but I've spent all day securing cargo on trucks. I know how to make everything tight. Big Bill patted Tommy on the shoulder, chuckling. Good, kid. Just follow me, and we'll lock this place down tighter than a bank vault. John watched them, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. What about the windows? He asked Emma. She shrugged, pondering. We'll probably have to use some boards to cover them temporarily, but if they come with bats or anything heavy, it won't hold for long. John nodded, adding a few more symbols to the map with his hand. All right, we don't need to turn this place into a fortress. Just slow them down enough for us to react. Let's get started, everyone. The atmosphere in Sunset Oasis was no longer as heavy as when Sledge and Viper had left. The initial fear had given way to a new rhythm, the rhythm of preparation, of ordinary people starting to believe they could face the approaching threat. John stood up, tapping lightly on the counter to get everyone's attention. Listen up, he said, his voice deep but echoing through the small room. The Black Vipers will be back, and this time they won't just be talking. They want to threaten us, to make us kneel. But if we stand firm tonight, they'll have to think twice before targeting Sunset Oasis again. Got it, everyone? Sarah nodded, her eyes gleaming with determination. Got it, Carver. I won't let them take this place. This is my home, Emma's, and everyone else's. Emma smiled, though still a bit tense in her voice. Me too. If you say we can do it, then I believe you, John. Big Bill and Tommy also nodded, and from the corner of the room, a few other drivers quietly stood up, stepping closer as if wanting to join the small group without an invitation. John looked around, feeling the strength forming not from weapons or numbers, but from the willpower of those ready to protect this place, even though just a few hours ago they were scared. But that moment of unity was quickly shattered. The roar of motorcycles sounded again from a distance, this time not just two, but a whole chorus of fierce engines, tearing through the night like the howl of a pack of hungry wolves. Emma ran to the window, peering outside through the dusty glass, then turned back with wide, panicked eyes. John, it's them. Not just two guys. I counted at least 6, maybe more. Sarah clenched her fists, turned to John with an urgent tone. 6? We're not ready for that many. Big Bill and Tommy are still dealing with the back door. We haven't finished anything. John got up, walked to the window, and looked out at the parking lot. 6 motorcycles were cruising in the dim light of the lot, their shiny chrome flashing like the teeth of a wild beast ready to tear into its prey. Sledge led the pack, his gray beard standing out under the headlights, his cold eyes scanning Sunset Oasis as if sizing up his target. Following him was Viper, twirling a chain in his hand, and 4 new guys, each one big and burly, their black leather jackets revealing crude weapons. Chains, baseball bats, a long steel bar, and one guy even holding a small hammer that was definitely not for fixing bikes. They weren't in a rush, moving slowly and deliberately, as if they wanted everyone inside to feel the heavy pressure coming their way. They want us to be scared, John said, his voice calm but sharp as a freshly honed blade. That's how they operate, setting up their forces to intimidate before they strike. Don't let them achieve their goal. He turned to the group, his gaze sweeping over each person. No one acts rashly. Let them come in and do what they want to do. Everything they do tonight will be evidence later. Sarah furrowed her brow and stepped closer to John. You mean just let them trash the place? This bar is my whole life, John. I won't stand by and watch them destroy everything I've built. John placed his hand on Sarah's shoulder, his gaze steady yet filled with empathy. I'm not saying we should let them tear everything apart, he replied. But we need time for Doc and the others to get here, for Hank to arrive. If we react right now, we're doomed from the start. They outnumber us. They're more aggressive, and they want us to make a mistake. Don't give them that chance. Sarah took a deep breath, nodding reluctantly. All right, but if they go too far, I won't just stand by. The doorbell jingled as Sledge pushed the door open, striding in with even more arrogant swagger than last time. Viper and 4 other guys followed, filling the small space of Sunset Oasis with a smell of leather, motor oil, and an unspoken threat. So, old man, Sledge growled, his eyes locking onto John. Still sitting here waiting for us? This time I brought friends to play along, to make sure you understand who runs this road. He let out a loud, raspy laugh that echoed around, while Viper stepped closer to the counter, a chain wrapped around his hand like a silent warning. John didn't answer right away. He sat back down, took a sip of his coffee as if nothing had happened, and then looked up at Sledge. I see, he said, his voice steady but carrying a weight that couldn't be ignored. But if you think 6 people are enough to take over Sunset Oasis, you're wrong. The door of Sunset Oasis shook as Sledge stepped in, his heavy boots thudding on the wooden floor like a drum roll signaling an impending battle. Behind him, Viper and 4 other black Vipers filled the small space of the rest stop, their presence like a cold wind blowing through, carrying the scent of leather, motor oil, and unspoken threats. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting light on the faces of the patrons from a fear on Emma Grayson's face to the defiant toughness in Sarah Coleman's eyes. But in the midst of it all, John Carver sat calmly at the counter, his coffee cup steady in his hand, as if the 6 menacing bikers were just a group of unwelcome latecomers to a meal. Sledge stood in the middle of the bar, his arms outstretched as if he wanted to embrace the entire space. Look at us, old man, he bellowed, his eyes locked on John. Who the hell do you think you are, telling us to take our party elsewhere? This time, I brought the whole crew not to chat, but to teach you a lesson. He let out a loud laugh, his hoarse voice echoing throughout the room, while Viper stepped closer to the counter, twirling a chain around his wrist like a slithering snake. You want us to prove it, old man? Viper growled, slamming the chain down on the floor with a loud clang, making Emma shriek and back away behind Sarah. John set his coffee cup down, his movements so slow they were almost taunting. He looked up at Sledge, his gaze calm but as sharp as a freshly honed blade. I told you, he replied, his voice steady but carrying a weight that couldn't be ignored. If you think 6 guys are enough to take over Sunset Oasis, you're wrong. I'm giving you one last chance to get back in your car, leave, and forget about this. Sledge smirked, stepping closer, his towering figure casting a deadly shadow over the counter. Who are you trying to scare? Old man, we're not going anywhere, and you'll see what happens when you dare to speak up against the Black Vipers. Sarah stood right behind the counter, her hand gripping the wooden edge so tightly that her knuckles turned white. This isn't yours, she said, her voice trembling slightly but full of determination. You have no right to come in here and demand anything. Sledge turned to her, his eyes narrowing like a predator sizing up its prey. No right? He repeated, his tone mocking. I have a right to anything I want, sweetheart. This block now belongs to the Black Vipers, and so does the Sunset Oasis. Hand over the money, or we'll take it ourselves. It's as simple as that. John stood up and walked between Sledge and Sarah, his thin frame not backing down in front of the massive bikers. That's enough, he said, his voice low but sharp, slicing to the thick air. You want to make a move? Fine, but I'm warning you, leave now or regret it later. Sledge stared at him for a long moment, his gaze tinged with doubt, but then he sneered and motioned for his crew to step forward. Go ahead, old man, he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. We're staying right here, and you'll see just how natural we are. Viper smirked, the chain in his hand clinking as he stepped closer. Another guy, Brick, with a shaved head and muscular arms, slammed a baseball bat down onto a nearby table, splitting it in two amidst the horrified screams of the remaining family in the bar. The father pulled his young daughter close, whispering something to reassure her, while the mother covered her child's eyes, her face pale with fear. Emma gripped Sarah's hand, her voice trembling. John, they're about to trash everything. Why are you just standing there? John turned back to look at Emma, a hint of comfort in his eyes. Stay calm, he said. Let them do it. Everything they destroy tonight will be evidence against them later. Sarah shook her head, her voice urgent. But my bar, John. I can't let them tear apart everything I've built. John placed his hand on her shoulder, his voice deep but firm. I know, Sarah, but we need time. Doc and the others are on their way. So is Hank. If we fight back now, they'll have an excuse to call for more people. We have to play smarter. Sledge heard John's whisper and burst into a louder laugh. Time? You think you have time, old man? We're your time and it's running out. He signaled to Brick and the other two to start searching the bar. Brick smashed another chair, while a guy with greasy long hair nicknamed Rusty overturned tables near the window, scattering plates and dishes all over the floor. Viper approached the counter, his hand raising a chain as if to smash the coffee machine, but John raised his hand to stop him, his voice icy. Don't touch that. If you want to break something else. Viper stopped, surprised by John's calmness, but then he smirked and turned to smash a stack of plates on the shelf. The sound of shattering porcelain rang out, causing Emma to hiss again. Sarah stepped forward, ready to intervene, but John pulled her back. Wait, he whispered. Let them dig their own grave. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Big Bill and Tommy had quietly moved closer to the back door, completing the reinforcement as planned. They crouched low, avoiding the gaze of the Black Vipers, and nodded at John from a distance, signaling that at least one part of the defense was ready. Sledge noticed John's silence and stepped closer. Why so quiet, old man? Out of tricks. He leaned down, his breath heavy with the smell of cigarettes blowing into John's face. Or do you know you've lost, but you're just too scared to admit it? John looked up, his gaze unwavering. I haven't lost, he said. You, on the other hand, have just started losing without even realizing it. Sledge furrowed his brow, his confidence momentarily shaken, but then he shook his head and turned to his gang. Trash this place. Let's see how long this old man can keep up his tough talk. Brick smashes another table, while Rusty knocks over a display shelf near the door, spilling several soda cans onto the floor. Viper heads back to the counter, this time aiming for the cash register, but Sarah rushes in front of him. Don't you dare touch that, she screams, pushing Viper away. The young biker chuckles menacingly, raising his hand to slap Sarah, but John, quick as a flash, grabs Viper's wrist and twists it back. I told you not to go too far. John growls, tightening his grip until Viper yelps in pain. Sledge turned around, pulling a switchblade from his belt. You want to die, old man? He growled, stepping closer to John. But before he could do anything, the sound of police sirens echoed from a distance, faint but clear, cutting to the tense air. Sledge froze, his eyes scanning towards a window where the blue and red lights began to flicker on Interstate I-70. Cops? He muttered, turning to John. Did you call them? John let go of Viper, letting him collapse to the floor, then turned to look at Sledge. I didn't need to call, he said, his voice calm. But it looks like someone did it for me. So what now, Sledge? Do you want to stay and explain this to the cops, or do you want to run before they get here? Sledge gritted his teeth, his eyes darting between John and the door. The sirens grew louder, and in the distance, the headlights of several other trucks appeared not from the Black Vipers, but from the people John had called in. You got lucky this time, Sledge growled, signaling his crew to retreat. But we'll be back with more people. Sunset Oasis belongs to us. Old man, remember that. He turned around, leading the Black Vipers out the door, leaving behind a mess of broken tables, chairs, and shattered plates. As the sound of the motorcycle faded away, Sarah let out a sigh of relief, clutching her chest. We did it, she said, her voice trembling. John nodded, his eyes still glued to the window. This is just the beginning, he said. They'll be back, and next time it won't be this easy. The roar of the Black Vipers' motorcycles gradually faded into the night, leaving Sunset Oasis in a tense silence, mixed with a hint of relief. The blue and red lights of the police cars flickered in the distance on Interstate 70, blending with the headlights of a few other trucks approaching not enemies, but allies that John Carver had called in. Inside the rest stop, the chaos of broken tables, shattered plates, and toppled shelves was scattered across the wooden floor like the aftermath of a storm that had just passed. Sarah Coleman stood behind the counter, clutching her chest, her breath still heavy. We did it, she said, her voice trembling but her eyes shining with a glimmer of hope. Emma Grayson, still gripping Sarah's arm tightly, nodded weakly. But they said they'd be back, John, with more people. John stood near the window, his gaze fixed on the now quiet parking lot, with only a few regular customers' trucks standing silently under the streetlights. "I know," he replied, his voice deep but firm. "This is just the beginning. They'll be back, and next time it won't be so easy. But we've shown them one thing. Sunset Oasis is an easy target." He turned around, looking at Sarah, Emma, and the group in the bar. Big Bill Henderson and Tommy Reed had just stepped out from the back door, their faces covered in dust, but their eyes burning with determination. Big Bill wiped his hands on his shirt, chuckling gruffly. "The back door is as solid as a concrete wall now, Carver. If they want in, they'll need a bulldozer." Tommy nodded, adding, "We also barricaded the east windows with some planks. It's not perfect, but it'll slow them down." John nodded in satisfaction. "Great job. You've all done more than I expected. Now we need more people and more plans." The sound of the police siren grew louder, and an old patrol car rolled into the parking lot, its flashing lights turning off as it came to a stop. Police Chief Hank Larson, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair and a slight limp, stepped out, flashlight in hand, shining it on the mess in front of Sunset Oasis. He pushed the door open and walked in, his eyes scanning the scene inside before stopping on John. "Carver," Hank said, his voice hoarse but friendly, "I heard you're causing trouble here again. What just happened?" Sarah stepped forward, her voice urgent but clear. "Black Vipers, Hank. 6 guys just barged in here, trashed the place, and demanded protection money. If John hadn't stopped them, they probably would have burned my bar down." Hank furrowed his brow, scratching his chin. "Black Vipers, huh? They've been running wild along I-70 for the past month. I've only got 2 deputies, not enough to handle it if they bring the whole gang. But I heard them leave what made them run off like that." John gave a faint smile, pointing out the window. "That's your horn, Hank, and a few of my buddies are rolling in. They won't stick around long once they know someone's watching." Hank looked outside, his eyes lighting up as he spotted 2 more trucks pulling into the lot. Not just any trucks, but big, sturdy ones, with guys stepping out who looked all too familiar with trouble. "Your friends?" Hank asked, turning back to John. "Don't tell me you called in the whole Marine Corps here." "Not exactly," John replied, stepping forward to clap Hank on the shoulder. "Just a few guys who fought alongside me. Now they drive trucks, work in garages, but they still know how to handle guys like the Black Vipers. One of them, Mike Sullivan, nicknamed Doc, is on his way. He'll bring some useful stuff." Hank nodded, a hint of relief flashing in his eyes. "Good. I'll document this case. Take statements from everyone. But John, if they come back with a whole gang, I'm not sure there's anything I can do except watch." John nodded, his eyes turning sharp. "I'm not expecting you to fight for us, Hank. Just be there, keep everything legal. I'll handle the rest." Before Hank could respond, another truck screeched into the lot, its door swinging open. A tall, thin man stepped out like Doc Sullivan, with his messy black hair and bright eyes behind steel-framed glasses. He carried a large bag and had a toolbox slung over his shoulder that looked like it belonged to a mechanic. But John knew it contained something far more dangerous. "Carver," Doc called out loudly, walking into the bar with a half-smile. "I heard you got me into trouble again. Who are these Black Vipers that dare to mess with you?" John shook Doc's hand, a firm handshake between 2 men who had been through life and death together. "A gang of bikers who think they can take over Sunset Oasis as a hub for contraband," John replied. "But they picked the wrong guy to mess with." Doc looked around, his gaze stopping at the pile of rubble on the floor. "I see. They did quite a bit of damage before you chased them off, huh?" Sarah chimed in, her voice tinged with hope. "John said you could help us, Mr. Sullivan. They're going to come back this time with more people. What should we do?" Doc set his bag down, unzipped it, and pulled out a few small devices, a mini camera, motion sensors, and a sturdy old radio. "Just call me Doc," he said, winking at Sarah. "I used to be a battlefield doctor. Now I run a garage in Denver, but I still keep some toys from the old days. These will help us know when and where they're coming from. As for fighting, leave that to Carver. He's better at it than I am." John nodded, pointing at the map on the counter. "Doc, I need you to set these up at the parking lot and the entrances. We got to know how the Black Vipers are moving before they get close. Big Bill, Tommy, you guys help document Sarah. Emma, round everyone up. Fill Hank in on what just went down. I need a few minutes to call in some more people." Everyone nodded, starting to move as a team, not as soldiers, but as ordinary folks forced to fight for the place they call home. As Doc and Big Bill take the equipment outside, John pulls out his phone and dials another friend, Sam Ranger Jackson, a former sharpshooter who used to drive trucks through 3 states. "Ranger, it's me," John says as the line picks up. "I need you at Sunset Oasis tonight. The Black Vipers are targeting this place, and I need your gun." Ranger's voice comes through, deep and steady. "I'm near Nebraska, but I'll be there ASAP. Don't let them win before I get there. Carver." John hung up the phone and turned to look at Hank, who was taking notes on Sarah's statement. "Hank," he called out, his voice deep but clear, "have you heard anything from the other joints along I-70? The Black Vipers aren't just targeting this place. They're expanding their territory." Hank nodded, his expression serious. "Yeah, a spot near Lincoln got torched last week. Another joint to the east reported them causing trouble, demanding money. I think they got someone backing them up. It's not just a bunch of rowdy bikers." John nodded, his eyes lighting up with a spark of recognition. "I think so, too. I've seen this model before, small gang working as pawns for something bigger, maybe a cartel. If that's the case, then Sunset Oasis is just the beginning." Sarah, hearing this, stepped closer. "You mean they won't stop here?" John looked at her, nodding slowly. "No, but if we stop them here, they won't get far." The sound of Doc's truck engine echoes outside the parking lot as he starts setting up the equipment. Hank's police lights flicker weakly, and from a distance, the sound of the Black Vipers' motorcycles echoes back not close, but enough to remind everyone that the battle isn't over. John turns back to the map, drawing another red circle with his hand. "We've got a few hours to get ready," he says. "Next time, they won't just threaten, they'll attack." The atmosphere in Sunset Oasis was still heavy after the retreat of the Black Vipers, but now, it wasn't just fear or tension. It was something sharper, like the smell of metal right before a sword is drawn from its sheath. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, illuminating the wreckage that Sledge and his cronies had left behind. Broken tables and chairs, shattered plates, and toppled shelves scattered across the wooden floor like the remnants of a small battle that had just ended. But John Carver knew full well that this was far from over. It was just the beginning of a much larger war. John stood near the counter, the truck map in front of him now covered with red circles and scribbled notes. It wasn't just a route. It was a strategy taking shape. Outside, the headlights of Sheriff Hank Larson's car flickered weakly in the parking lot, while Mike Doc Sullivan and Big Bill Henderson were busy installing mini cameras and motion sensors around the entrances. Sarah Coleman stood close to John, her arms folded, her eyes filled with both concern and determination. "We just chase them off, John," she said, her voice low but clear. "But they'll be back, you're right. Next time, it won't just be 6 guys. So, what's your plan?" John looked up from the map, his gaze sharp but with a certainty Sarah had never seen before. "We didn't just chase them off, Sarah," he replied. "We just gave them a reason to come back stronger, more vicious. And that's exactly what I want." Sarah furrowed her brows, stepping closer. "What do you mean? You want them to come back? I thought you said we had to protect Sunset Oasis." Emma Grayson, having just gathered a pile of debris near the counter, chimed in with a voice full of confusion. "Yeah, John, I don't get it. They just trashed this place, and now you want them to come back? Why?" John gave a faint smile, the kind he rarely showed, not out of happiness, but because he knew he was in control. "I don't want them to come back to cause more damage," he explained, pointing at the map. "I want them to come back to expose themselves. The Black Vipers aren't just your typical rowdy bikers. They're pawns for something bigger, more organized. I've hunted networks like this before, and the only way to take them down is to let them think they're winning. then use their own strength against them. Hank Larson walked into the front door, a small notebook full of notes in his hand. He caught the end of the sentence and, furrowing his brow, asked, "Using their strength against them? Sounds like one of your military plans. Carver, but what's the specifics? These black vipers outnumber us. And if they got someone backing them like you say, they won't be easy to take down." John nodded, turned to Hank. "Exactly. But the more of them there are, the more likely they are to mess up. I've seen this pattern so many times they'll come back with a whole crew, threatening, vandalizing, trying to crush us. And every time they do that, they'll leave a trail that you, Hank, and people like Doc can use to bring them down." Doc walked in from the parking lot, wiping sweat with an oily rag. "The cameras and sensors are done," he reported, his voice hoarse but full of energy. "I placed them in the parking lot, the back door, and on both sides. If the black vipers come within 100 meters, we'll know right away. And this radio," he held up a sturdy old device, "will help us communicate without relying on phones they could jam if they're smarter than I think." John nodded, his eyes lighting up. "Great job, Document. Now we need one more thing, evidence." Emma blinked, placing a pile of shards on the floor. "Evidence? You mean like what the cops need to arrest them? But they just trashed this place, isn't that enough?" John shook his head, stepping closer to Emma. "It's not enough to take down the whole network, Emma. The black vipers are just the surface. I need evidence of what they're doing, who's behind it, what they're transporting, and where it's going. Things Hank can use to call in reinforcements from the state, not just the local police." Hank nodded, adding, "John's right. I can arrest a few guys for vandalism, but if we want to take down the whole gang and something bigger, we need more than that." Sarah crossed her arms, her expression shifting from worry to curiosity. "So, what's your plan? Record them vandalizing the place again? Or something smarter?" John pointed to the wreckage on the floor. "All this the broken table. The shattered plates, it's just the beginning. But I want more. Next time they come, we'll let them think we're panicked, weak. We'll let them get overly confident. And when they're confident, they'll say and do things that we can capture on record." Big Bill, just back from the back door, chimed in with a hoarse voice. "You mean let them keep trashing the place and then snap photos or film them? They're not stupid, Carver. If they see a camera, they'll smash it too." John nodded, a sly glint in his eyes. "Exactly, Big Bill. That's why we're not using a big camera. Doc has a mini camera, so small they won't even notice it. And we've got this." He pulled out a Nokia phone, holding it up. "Everyone here has a phone, right? Use it. Record video, audio, anytime they open their mouths or make a move. The more aggressive they get, the better it is for us." Emma tilted her head, her eyes lighting up as she understood. "You mean we'll pretend to be scared? So they think we're about to lose, and then secretly record everything they do?" John nodded, turning to the group. "Exactly. The black vipers rely on fear, that's their strength. But if we turn that fear into a weapon, they won't realize they've shot themselves in the foot until it's too late." Hank tapped his pen on the notepad, his gaze serious yet approving. "I like this idea, Carver. But what if they come back with a whole crew of 20, 30 guys? We don't have enough people to hold them off, even with cameras and phones." John nodded, his eyes shifting to Document. "That's where Doc and Ranger come in. Ranger Sam Jackson is my old sharpshooter on his way here. He's not just good with a gun, but he knows how to scare the crap out of them. And Doc," he clapped his friend on the shoulder, "will keep us alive if things get out of hand." Doc chuckled hoarsely, holding up his bag. "I've got a few things besides the camera, bandages, medicine, and a couple of self-defense items. The black vipers want to play rough. I'll show them what real pain is." Sarah nodded slowly, her eyes lighting up as the plan became clearer. "So, we're not just defending ourselves, we're setting a trap for them?" John nodded, his gaze fixed on the map. "Exactly. They think they're the hunters, but we're going to turn them into the prey." The atmosphere in Sunset Oasis shifted from the relief following the black vipers' retreat to a new rhythm, full of determination but also tension. The sound of Ranger's truck engine echoed from afar, signaling the arrival of new allies. John turned to the group, his voice deep but strong. Get ready. Next time the Black Vipers come, we won't just survive, we'll make them regret ever choosing Sunset Oasis as their target. The engine of Sam Ranger, Jackson's truck, roared as it rolled into the parking lot of Sunset Oasis, shattering the tense silence following John Carver's declaration. The headlights swept through the darkness, illuminating the faces waiting inside the rest stop. Sarah Coleman stood by the counter with a determined look. Emma Grayson clutched her phone like a new weapon, and Mike Doc Sullivan had just finished checking his bag. John stepped out the door, greeting Ranger as he jumped down from the truck's cab, a tall man with a military-style short haircut and eyes sharp as knives, carrying a heavy backpack. Carver, Ranger spoke up, his voice deep and steady, shaking John's hand with a firm grip of a man who had seen life and death. I hear you need a shooter. Who are these Black Vipers that dare to mess with you? John nodded, leading Ranger inside. A bunch of bikers who think they can take over Sunset Oasis as a hub for contraband, he replied. But they're not alone. I bet there's someone backing them, and I want them to show their faces. Ranger smirked, dropping his backpack to the floor with a heavy thud. Then you called the right guy. I brought along a few gadgets, not real guns, but enough to scare the crap out of them if needed. Sarah stepped forward, her eyes lighting up as she saw another ally. Are you Ranger? John said you used to be a sharpshooter. Ranger nodded, opening his backpack to reveal a few air guns and a small but sharp crossbow. That's right. I don't carry hot stuff. I don't want trouble with the law, but these should make them think twice before charging in. John patted Ranger on the shoulder, a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. Good. We don't need to kill anyone, just mess them up, make them slip up. Doc put on his headset and raised the radio. The camera and sensors are ready, Carver. I just checked. If the Black Vipers come close, we'll see them before they see us. John nodded, turning back to the group gathered around the counter. Big Bill Henderson and Tommy Reed were standing nearby, their hands still dusty from reinforcing the back door, while Hank Larson jotted down a few more lines in his notebook. Listen up, John said, his voice deep but resonant. The Black Vipers will be back, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow morning. When they come, we'll let them think we're weak, panicked, but everyone needs to remember we're not really weak. We're setting a trap. Emma held up her phone, her eyes showing a hint of worry, but full of determination. You mean we just pretend to be scared, then film them, right? But what if they see us holding our phones? John nodded, pointing at document. That's when Doc's camera comes into play. They're small, well hidden, they won't see them. As for the phones, you just need to record when they're not paying attention, like when they're trash in place or bragging. The more aggressive they get, the better it is for us. Sarah folded her arms, her gaze turning sharp. I get it, but what if they don't just vandalize but attack us too? We don't have enough people to fight them all off, John. Ranger spoke up, his voice calm but firm. That's when me and these gadgets come in. I'll set up some stuff outside in the parking lot, rubber bullet shotguns, a few small traps to trip them up, non-lethal, but enough to scare them and throw them off balance. Carver will handle the rest. John nodded, turned back to map, and added a few more symbols. The Black Vipers rely on their numbers and fear that's their strength, but if we throw them off, they'll start making mistakes. One guy yelling, another bragging it'll all be recorded. Hank, he looked at the sheriff, you need to be ready to use this stuff. When we have enough evidence, you can call in reinforcements from the state, right? Hank nodded, tapping his pen on his notepad. That's right. If you give me video or audio proving they're not just causing trouble, but working for someone bigger, I can call in the state task force. But you have to be sure or they'll get away. John turned to the group, his eyes locking onto each person. Everyone hear that? When they come, we don't fight them head on. We let them in, let them make a ruckus. Sarah, Emma, you two record video, audio. Big Bill, Tommy, you guys guard the back door. Don't let them cut off our escape route. Doc and Ranger, you two cause chaos from outside. I'll be here, keeping them focused on me. Sarah nodded, her voice more confident. Got it, Carver. I'll do it, but you gotta promise my bar won't be burned to the ground. John gave a faint smile, placing his hand on Sarah's shoulder. I promise, Sarah. They can break things, but we'll get everything back and more when they fall. Emma held up her phone, giving a weak smile. I'll do it too, but if they come in too big a crowd, I'm not sure I can keep my cool. Doc patted her on the shoulder, chuckling. Just leave it to me if you faint, kid. I've patched people up while bombs are going off. These biker guys are nothing. Big Bill stepped forward, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. I like this plan, Carver. Let them think they've won, then hit them back with their own game. Sounds delicious. Tommy nodded, adding, I'll be at the back door with you, Bill. If they try to sneak in, I'll show them how tight I tie things up. John nodded, his eyes lighting up as he saw this small group gradually becoming a team not soldiers, but ordinary folks ready to fight for their homes. Hank closed his notebook and looked at John with serious expression. I'll stay until morning. Carver, if the Black Vipers come back tonight, I'll document everything. But you've got to make sure your trap works. Otherwise, we won't get a second shot. John nodded, turning back to the map. It'll work, Hank. I've done this with guys way more dangerous than the Black Vipers. They'll shoot themselves in the foot, and we just need to be in the right spot to watch. The cold wind blew through the parking lot, carrying the faint sound of motorcycle engines from afar, not clear, but enough to remind everyone that time was running out. Ranger stood up, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. I'm going out to set some traps. Doc, will you help me? Doc nodded, picking up his bag. Let's go. The Black Vipers are in for a long night if they dare come back. The two headed outside, leaving John, Sarah, Emma, and the rest of the group in the bar. Sarah looked at John, her voice low but full of confidence. Are you sure about this, John? The plan sounds good, but what if there are too many of them? John turned around, his eyes determined. I'm sure. They may be many, but they're not smart. We'll use their own aggression against them. Get ready. Next time they come, we'll be ready. The atmosphere in Sunset Oasis was tense, like a tightly strung guitar string. The silent preparations were mixed with anxiety, but above all, the determination was becoming increasingly clear. The footsteps of Ranger and Doc echoed from the parking lot, and in the distance, the sound of a motorcycle grew a bit closer. John sat at the counter, his hand on the map, his eyes gleaming with sharp intensity. You guys want a war, he whispered, not to anyone in the room, but to the enemy out there. I'll give you a battle you'll never forget. The darkness enveloped Sunset Oasis more thickly as the cold wind blew through the parking lot, carrying the faint but increasingly clear sound of motorcycle engines from afar on Interstate I-70. Inside the rest stop, the atmosphere vibrated with a new rhythm, no longer the trembling fear from when Sledge and the Black Vipers first walked in, but a tension mixed with determination from a small group that had chosen to stand up and fight. John Carver sat at a counter, the truck map in front of him now resembling a strategic chessboard, marked with red circles and scribbled symbols indicating each step of the clever plan he had just devised. Sarah Coleman stood nearby, phone in hand with the camera ready, her eyes scanning the rubble left by the Black Viper's previous attack. John, she said, her voice low but firm, if they come back right now, do you think we're ready? Ranger and Doc are still out there, and we only have a few people here. John looked up, his gaze calm but sharp. We're ready enough to start, Sarah, he replied. The Black Vipers don't need to know how strong we are. They just need to see us as weak. That's when the plan kicks in. Emma Grayson approached from the window, her hands gripping her phone tightly, her face showing a hint of worry but her eyes lighting up as she listened to John. I checked the window again, she reported. Big Bill and Tommy did a great job. They won't be able to break in from the east easily, but if they come in numbers like you said, I'm not sure I'll be able to stay calm enough to keep filming. John stood up, placing his hand on Emma's shoulder, his voice gentle but full of confidence. You don't need to stay calm, Emma. You just need to do what I say, pretend to be scared. Let them think they've won. Your phone is your weapon, keep filming, even if your hands are shaking. The heavy footsteps echoed from the front door as Mike Doc Sullivan and Sam Ranger Jackson walked in, their faces covered in dust and sweat after setting up the traps outside the parking lot. Doc held up the radio, giving a half smile. "Everything's ready, Carver," he said. "Cameras are up and running. Sensors too. I placed a few near the entrance, so if the black vipers come, we'll spot them from half a mile away." Ranger dropped his backpack to the floor, pulling out a rubber bullet gun and quickly checking it. "Traps are set too," he added. "Some low-hanging wires for them to trip over. And I scattered some small nails around, not enough to kill, but enough to mess them up." John nodded, his eyes lighting up as he saw the plan taking shape. "All right, everyone get into position. Doc, keep an eye on the radio and cameras, and report back as soon as you spot them. Ranger, head out to the parking lot, and keep them distracted if they get close. Big Bill, Tommy, you guys take the back door. Sarah, Emma, you stay here with me, ready to record everything." Big Bill clapped Tommy on the shoulder, chuckling. "Let's go, kid. We'll guard the back door like it's Fort Knox." Tommy nodded, following Big Bill to back, holding a wooden stick as a makeshift weapon. Hank Larson stood near the door, closing his notebook and looking at John with a serious expression. "I'll be here until they arrive, Carver," he said. "But if there are too many of them, I'll have to call in more people from the next county. Are you sure this trap will give me enough evidence?" John nodded, stepping forward to pat Hank on the shoulder. "I'm sure, Hank. The black vipers will show themselves. They can't resist bragging when they think they've won. Just be ready to act when I give the signal." The sound of motorcycles from afar is now clearer, no longer a vague noise but chorus of roaring engines, signaling the return of the black vipers. This time, they're not here to test the waters, but to attack. Doc sets the radio down on the counter, his voice urgent. "Carver, the cameras picked them up 8 bikes, a mile away and coming fast. It looks like they're not messing around anymore." Sarah takes a deep breath, holding up her phone. "8 guys? John, can we do this?" John turns to her, his gaze determined. "We can do this. 8 or 20, it doesn't matter. The more of them there are, the more likely they are to make mistakes." Ranger hoisted his backpack, stepping out the door with the stride of a man accustomed to battlefield. "I'm heading to the beach to stir them up before they get here," he said, his voice calm but sharp. Doc nodded, picking up the radio. "I'll report every step, Carver. If they get close, you'll know right away." He stepped behind the counter, sitting down with a radio and a small screen connected to a camera. John turned back to Sarah and Emma, his voice deep but strong. "It's showtime. When they come in, Sarah, you scream, act like you're panicked. Emma, you run behind the counter, pretend to hide, but remember to keep filming. I'll keep them focused on me." Sarah nodded, taking a deep breath to prepare. "All right, I'll make them think I'm about to beg." Emma gave a weak smile, gripping her phone tightly. "I'll hide behind the counter, but I'll record everything, John." John nodded, settling back into a spot at the counter, his hand resting on his coffee mug as if nothing was happening. But out of the corner of his eye, he saw the headlights of the motorcycles peeking out in the parking lot, and the roar now vibrating through the wooden floor of Sunset Oasis. The doorbell jangled as Sledge pushed the door open hard, stepping and looking more menacing than ever. Behind him, Viper and 7 other guys filled the space, each armed with makeshift weapons chains, baseball bats, and one guy even carrying a small hammer. "Old man," Sledge bellowed, his gaze locked on John. "You think you got away last time, huh? Well, this time we brought the whole crew. Sunset Oasis is ours now." He let out a loud, raspy laugh that echoed around, while Viper stepped closer to the counter, the chain in his hand spinning wildly. Sarah screamed according to plan, her voice breaking as if it were real. "Stop. Don't break anything else. Take whatever you want." She raised her hands to her head, but the phone in her hand discreetly recorded every move Sledge made. Emma hissed, ran behind the counter, and crouched down, pretending to hide, but she held her phone up through a crack, capturing everything. John stood up, stepped between Sledge and Sarah, his gaze calm yet challenging. "You want Sunset Oasis?" he said, his voice steady. "Then go ahead and try to take it. But I warn you, you won't like the price you'll have to pay." Sledge smirked, raising his dagger. "You're out of tricks, old man. We're gonna smash this place to pieces, and you'll be begging me for mercy." He signaled to his gang, and Brick slammed his baseball bat down on another table, shattering it. Viper threw his chain at the coffee machine, but John quickly raised his hand to stop him. "Don't rush," he said, his voice icy. "You guys want to destroy things? Fine. But I promise everything you do tonight will come back to bite you." Doc's radio crackles from behind the counter, his voice whispering over the airwaves. "Ranger just took down a guy out there. They're all rattled. Keep them inside, Carver." John nods slightly, his eyes never leaving Sledge. "Make yourself at home," he says, sitting back at the counter as if inviting him. Sledge roars, lunging forward, but Ranger's shotgun blast echoes from the parking lot, causing a few black vipers to freeze. The battle has begun, not with fists, but with cunning. The fluorescent lights in Sunset Oasis flickered gently as the sound of Sam Ranger Jackson's shotgun echoed from the parking lot, causing the black vipers to pause in their fury. Inside the diner, the tension was as tight as a guitar string. Sledge stood in the middle of the floor, the dagger in his hand glinting under the lights. His furious gaze locked on John Carver. Viper, who had just been stopped by John from smashing the coffee machine, took a step back, the iron chain in his hand clinking against the floor. The rest of the bikers, Brick, Rusty, and the others wavered between arrogance and confusion as a strange noise from outside interrupted their rampage plans. John sat at the counter, looking as calm as if he were waiting for a fresh cup of coffee instead of facing 8 fierce bikers. "I've already told you," he said, his voice low but sharp. "You want Sunset Oasis? Go ahead and try to take it. But I promise the price won't be cheap." Sledge roared, lunging forward to stab John. But another bang from Ranger's air gun rang out, accompanied by a shout from a Black Viper's guy in the parking lot as he tripped over the wire Ranger had set up. Sledge froze, turning to window, his eyes narrowing as he saw his crew in disarray. Sarah Coleman, still standing behind the counter with her phone raised to record, shouts loudly as planned. "Stop it. Take what you want. Just don't cause any more damage." Her voice breaks, but the hand holding the phone discreetly captures every move Sledge makes. Emma Grayson, hiding behind the counter, hisses convincingly, yet she keeps her phone through a crack, the lens aimed directly at the Black Vipers. "Please, don't hurt us," she cries out, her voice trembling, though her eyes light up seeing John's plan in action. Sledge turned back, smirking. "Hear that, old man? Your crew knows they're beaten. What do you have left to fight us with?" He stepped closer to John, the dagger just inches from his chest. But John didn't budge. "I don't need to fight you right now," he replied, his voice steady. "You're doing a great job fighting yourself." Sledge furrowed his brows, not yet grasping the meaning, when Mike Doc Sullivan's radio crackled from behind the counter, his voice whispering over the airwaves. "Carver, Ranger just took down 2 guys out there. They're losing their cool. Keep them in here a bit longer." John nodded slightly, his gaze fixed on Sledge. "Go ahead," he said, his voice tinged with sarcasm. "Break more stuff, I won't stop you." Sledge roared, turning to his gang. "Smash this whole place for me. Let's see how long this old man can keep his mouth shut." Brick rushed forward, smashing the baseball bat into another table, shattering it to pieces, while Rusty knocked over a shelf near the door, sending soda cans flying across the floor. Viper turned back to the counter, this time aiming for the cash register, but Sarah dashed forward to block him, shouting, "Don't you dare touch that." She pushed Viper, and he stumbled back, the chain falling to the floor. The sound of a truck engine echoes from a distance, not belonging to the Black Vipers, but others, familiar truckers from Sunset Oasis who had heard about the attack from other drivers on the road. Big Bill Henderson and Tommy Reed entered through the back door, each holding a wooden club and a coil of steel wire, their eyes blazing. "No one's touching Sarah's safe." Big Bill roars, stepping up beside John. Tommy nods, his voice trembling but resolute. "If you want to destroy something, you gotta go through us first." Sledge came back, his eyes wavering as he saw the people in the bar no longer cowering like before. "You trashy drivers want to be heroes, huh?" he sneered, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. Doc's radio blared again, louder this time. "Carver, 3 more trucks just pulled into the lot, and they're not Black Vipers. Looks like the local drivers heard the news and came over." John gave a faint smile, the first of the night, a glint of triumph shining in his eyes. The front door swung open again, and 3 drivers walked in, not veterans like Ranger or Doc, but regular folks who had been stopping by Sunset Oasis weekly. Joe Red Miller, a big guy with bright red hair who had been driving the I-70 for 20 years. Carl Slim Watkins, a skinny mechanic who often fixed cars at the diner. And Eddie Torres, a young driver with tattooed hands. "Heard the Black Vipers are causing trouble here," Red bellowed, gripping a large wrench. "No one messes with Sunset Oasis while we're around." Sarah turned to John, her eyes wide. "John, who are they? Did you call them?" John shook his head, his voice deep but full of emotion. "No, Sarah, I didn't call them. They came on their own because this is their home, just as it is yours." Emma stood up from behind the counter, still recording on her phone, but now she was smiling, tears glistening in her eyes. "They came for us, Sarah. We're not alone." Sledge took a step back, his eyes scanning the crowd that was now larger than expected. "What do you guys think you can do with this bunch of trash drivers?" he roared, but there was a hint of panic in his voice. Viper picked up the chain, charging towards Red, but the fiery red driver swung his wrench, knocking Viper down with a groan. Brick raised his baseball bat, but Slim and Eddie stepped forward, holding a wooden plank and a broken beer bottle. Their eyes no longer filled with fear, but brimming with defiance. John stood up, stepped between Sledge and the crowd in the bar, his voice ringing out like a declaration. "You see, Sledge, you're not just fighting me, you're fighting all of us. This isn't anyone's personal bar. It's a home to an entire community, and we won't let you take it." Sledge gritted his teeth, his eyes flickering as the sound of motorcycles in the parking lot started to get chaotic. The shouts of the Black Vipers echoing as they stumbled into Ranger's trap, and the police sirens of Hank Larson grew closer from a highway. "Let's go," Sledge shouted, signaling his crew to retreat. "This isn't over, old man. We'll be back with the whole gang." He stormed out the door, with Viper and the rest scrambling after him, leaving behind a devastated but unbowed Sunset Oasis. The sound of motorcycles faded into the distance, and the atmosphere in the bar suddenly grew heavy, but not from defeat, rather, from a new strength that had just been forged. Sarah let out a sigh, setting her phone down on the counter, her eyes filled with gratitude as she looked at John. "They're coming for us," she said, her voice trembling. "Not just you, John, but for this whole community." Emma ran up and hugged Sarah, tears streaming down her cheeks. "We did it!" They ran away. Red, Slim, and Eddie stepped forward, patting John and Big Bill on the shoulders, their eyes gleaming with pride. John turned back to look at the group, his voice deep but warm. "This is the real power, not guns, not numbers, but people willing to stand up for each other. The Black Vipers think they can crush us, but they just ran into something they'll never understand." Hank stepped in through the door, his eyes lighting up at the sight of the crowd in the bar. "I see it now, Carver," he said, "and I've got enough evidence from this time to call in the state team. But this is bigger than I thought." The atmosphere in Sunset Oasis shifted from tense to relieved, but a hint of worry lingered. The battle wasn't over yet. John sat back at the counter, his gaze fixed out the window where darkness still held a threat. "Get ready," he said. "Next time, we won't just push them back, we'll finish them off." Behind every punch from the Black Vipers is the strength of community that refuses to be beaten down. People like Red, Slim, and Eddie have stood up for Sunset Oasis, for their home. Can you feel that fire? If so, hit that like button and subscribe right now to join us in spreading the story of these ordinary folks doing extraordinary things. Thank you, everyone. Sunset Oasis was enveloped in a fragile silence after the Black Vipers retreated, their motorcycle engines fading into the thick darkness along Interstate 70. The flickering fluorescent lights inside the bar cast a weak glow on the faces that had just endured a small but meaningful battle. John Carver sat at the counter, his hand resting on a trucker's map, his eyes fixed on the window where the headlights of Sheriff Hank Larson's car still lingered in the parking lot. Sarah Coleman stood beside him, her hands trembling slightly as she set her phone down, the video of Sledge and his gang's attack still playing on the screen. Emma Grayson hugged Sarah tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks, but the smile on her lips shone as bright as the neon lights outside. "We did it, John," Sarah said, her voice still a bit shaky but full of emotion. They ran away, and it's not just because of you or Ranger. Everyone here, they stood up for Sunset Oasis. John turned to her, a rare warmth in his eyes. That's right, Sarah, he replied. I said from the start this wasn't just my fight. This is our fight. And tonight, we just proved it. Big Bill Henderson walked in from the back door, wiping sweat off with his grimy jacket, a wide grin on his scarred face. I never thought I'd see drivers like Red and Slim swinging wrenches at those bikers, he chuckled hoarsely. But seeing them stand up for this place, it's worth every penny. Tommy Reed, standing next to Big Bill, nodded, his voice slightly shaky but full of pride. Me too. I was just planning to hold the back door, but when I saw everyone stepping up, I knew we weren't alone. Joe, Red, Miller, Carl, Slim, Watkins, and Eddie Torres stand near the counter, still holding their makeshift weapons, a wrench, a wooden plank, and a broken beer bottle. Red claps John on the shoulder, his voice booming like thunder. I heard from a trucker on the road that the Sunset Oasis got trashed by the Black Vipers. I couldn't just sit by. This place is our home not just for eating, but where we belong. Slim nods, his voice quiet but firm. I've been fixing cars here for over a decade. If they want to burn this place down, they'll have to go through me first. Eddie, the youngest driver, smirks. I've got nothing but my truck and these tattoos, but I'm not letting them bully anyone here. John stood up, his gaze sweeping over the crowd in the bar. Not just a small group from the start, but now a real community, united by a common goal. You guys didn't need me to call you, he said, his voice deep but full of emotion. You came on your own because you know Sunset Oasis is worth protecting. That's something the Black Vipers will never understand. They think they can crush us with numbers, with fear, but they don't know that when a community stands up, nothing can defeat it. Hank Larson stepped closer, his notepad in hand, filled with notes from the recent attack. I see it now, Carver, he said, his eyes lighting up with amazement. I've got enough evidence from Sarah and Emma's video to call in the state task force. The Black Vipers aren't just causing trouble, they're working for someone bigger. And tonight, they just expose themselves. But this, he gestured around the bar, this is bigger than evidence. This is something I've never seen here, before everyone standing together like this. Sarah turned to Hank, her eyes lighting up as she listened to him. You mean we can actually take them down for good? Not just push them back, but end it all? Hank nodded, his voice firm. If Carver is right, and I think he is, then the Black Vipers are just pawns for a bigger network. With this evidence, we can call on the state team, even the FBI if we need to. But I need more. Next time they come back, we have to catch them and get them to spill the beans about that network. John nodded. Turning back to the group, Hank's right. Tonight was just the start. We pushed them back, but they'll be back, and next time they'll be even fiercer. We need to be ready not just to survive, but to take them down completely. Emma wiped away her tears, her voice soft but determined. I'll do it, John. I managed to record them threatening us. Sledge said something about taking this stretch of road. Is that enough? John gave a faint smile, patting her shoulder. It's enough to start, Emma. But next time, I want them to be clearer about who's behind this, what they're doing. We'll make them spill the beans themselves. Mike, Doc, Sullivan strides in from the parking lot, radio and a small screen connected to a camera in hand. Ranger's still out there, clearing the traps, he reports. The Black Vipers are scattering like crazy. 2 guys got hit in the legs with rubber bullets. 1 fell into the barbed wire I set up. They're not happy, Carver. John nods, a sly glint in his eyes. Good. The angrier they get, the more likely they are to screw up. Doc, check the cameras again next time. I want to see each guy clearly. Sarah sat down on one of the remaining chairs, her eyes scanning the devastated cafe, but without despair. I never thought I'd see this day, she said, her voice low. Sunset Oasis isn't just my place. It's everyone's spot here. And tonight, we proved it. Emma nodded, sitting next to Sarah. Yeah, I was scared out of my mind when they came in, but when I saw Red and Slim show up, I knew we'd be okay. Red burst into laughter, slapping the counter. We're no heroes, kid, but nobody messes with Sunset Oasis without paying the price. We've been driving all day. and this is our rest stop, and we're not letting the Black Vipers take it from us." Slim nodded, adding, "I've got some buddies at other stops along I-70. If we need more people, I'll call them." Eddie smirked, raising a broken beer bottle. "I've got some brothers in Kansas City. They won't mind a fight if it comes to that." John looked at them, his eyes briefly showing surprise, but quickly shifting to pride. "You guys aren't just protecting Sunset Oasis," he said. "You're sending a message not just to the Black Vipers, but to anyone who thinks they can bully us. They want to crush a rest stop? They'll have to face an entire community." Hank nodded, his eyes lighting up as he listened to John. "I'll stay until morning. Carver, if the Black Vipers come back tonight, I'll document everything and call the state team as soon as we have enough evidence. But you have to keep everyone safe. I don't want anyone getting hurt." John nodded and turned back to the group. "No one gets hurt. Hank, we'll make them fall by their own aggression." The cold wind blew through the parking lot, carrying the breath of a night that hadn't ended yet. Ranger walked in, a shotgun slung over his shoulder, his eyes blazing. "They all ran off," he reported. "But I bet they'll be back with the whole gang, just like Sledge said." John nodded, sitting back at the counter, his hand on the map. "Good. Next time, we won't just be a small group, we'll be a community. And that's what's going to beat them." The atmosphere in Sunset Oasis warmed up, from the relief after a small victory to the growing belief in their strength. But from a distance, the sound of motorcycle engines faintly echoed, just enough to remind them that the battle was still ahead. John looked out the window, his voice deep but strong. "Get ready. We just won a battle. Now it's time to win the whole war." The night sky over Sunset Oasis was as black as ink, with not a single star peeking through the thick clouds, leaving only the faint glow from the dim streetlights casting over the parking lot, which now looked more like a battlefield than a familiar rest stop. The cold wind blowing across Interstate 70 carried the smell of diesel and dry earth, mixed with the sound of motorcycle engines echoing from a distance, no longer the faint noise of before, but closer, stronger, and more ferocious, like the roar of a giant beast charging forward. Inside the rest stop, the air vibrated with the tension of an unavoidable battle. John Carver stood at the counter, his hands on a trucker's map, now covered in red circles and scribbled markings, not just a plan, but a declaration from a community ready to confront their greatest enemy. Sarah Coleman stood beside him, her hand gripping her phone tightly. The video from the previous Black Vipers attack still displayed on the screen evidence they had risked their lives to gather over the past few hours. "John," she said, her voice low but full of determination, "they're going to come back. You were right from the start. But can we do it this time? After everything we've done, after everything everyone has sacrificed?" John turned to her, his gaze as steady as steel, unwavering. "We will do it, Sarah," he replied, his voice even but carrying an unstoppable strength. "Not just push them back this time, we'll finish them off. But everyone has to stick to the plan. No rash moves, no letting emotions take over. We've come halfway. Now we just need that final step." Emma Grayson approached from a window, her hands trembling slightly as she peered into the darkness outside. "I hear motorcycles," she reported, her voice soft but clear, her eyes gleaming with a mix of worry and determination. "Not 8 like last time, John. I think more, maybe a dozen or even more." John nodded, showing no surprise, his eyes scanning the room to check everyone's position. "I figured as much," he said. Sledge wasn't kidding when he said he'd bring the whole gang. But that's what we want. The more, the easier they'll mess up. They think numbers are strength, but they don't know that'll be their biggest weakness tonight. Sarah furrowed her brow, stepping closer to John, her voice lowering as if she feared someone outside might hear. "Are you sure, John? We got cameras, Rangers traps, but if there are too many of them, can we hold them off? We're not the military. We're just a bunch of drivers, servers, and a few of your friends." John placed his hand on Sarah's shoulder, his eyes briefly showing a rare warmth. "We don't need to be the military, Sarah," he said. "We're a community, and that's something the Black Vipers will never understand. They rely on numbers to intimidate, but we rely on each other to win. Just stick to your role, keep filming. Stay calm, and I promise we'll get through this." Mike Doc, Sullivan's radio crackles from behind the counter, his voice urgent yet maintaining the calm of someone who's patched up wounds on the battlefield. Carver. The camera picked up 15 motorcycles, half a mile back and coming fast. But there are also 2 black SUVs trailing them, not your average rides. They look like they belong to some organized crew. John furrows his brow, a spark of realization lighting up his eyes as he hears Doc's update. SUVs? He echoes, his voice dropping. So, it's not just the Black Vipers anymore. I've seen these types of vehicles in operations against cartels, sleek, discreet, but reeking of dirty money. This could be our biggest break yet. Sarah turned to John, her eyes wide as she realized the meaning of his words. You mean there's someone behind them? It's not just a bunch of troublemaking bikers like we thought at first. John nodded, drawing a red circle around the Sunset Oasis location on the map, his gaze sharp as a razor. That's right, he replied. The Black Vipers are the pawns I've suspected for a while, but now I'm sure. Those 2 SUVs are carrying people from a larger network, maybe a cartel, maybe a cross-state criminal organization. If we catch them on video, not just Sledge and the bikers, but also the guys in the cars, we could take down the whole organization, not just these underlings. Hank Larson strides in from the front door, notebook and personal radio in hand, his face tense but his eyes lighting up as he listens to John. Carver, he speaks up, his voice hoarse but firm. If you're right about this, I'll call the state task force right now. But I need clear evidence. Not just video of them causing a ruckus, but something that links the Black Vipers to the crew in the SUV. Can you do that? John nods, his gaze locked on Hank. You'll have it, Hank, he says. When they come in here, we'll let them spill the beans on who's behind it, what they're up to, and we'll get all on video. Everyone just needs to play their part to make them think they've won. Think we're begging. Sam, Ranger, Jackson strides in from the parking lot. A rubber bullet gun slung over his shoulder, his face streaked with dust, but his eyes sharp as a sniper ready for battle. The traps out there are set, he reports, his voice calm yet confident. Low-hanging wires, scattered small nails, and a few spots with smoke bombs to throw them off when they get close. I'll be outside, keeping them slowed down for you. John pats Ranger on the shoulder, his voice deep but warm. Good job, Ranger. You throw them off, I'll make them talk. Don't let them get in too fast. We need time. Big Bill Henderson and Tommy Reed stood near the back door, holding a wooden beam and a roll of steel wire, their eyes blazing like soldiers guarding the last fortress. The back door is still as solid as a wall, Big Bill said, his voice hoarse but full of pride. If they want to get in from here, they'll need a sledgehammer or a bulldozer. Tommy nodded, adding in a shaky but determined voice, I'll stay here with you, Bill. They won't get through, John. John nodded, his gaze sweeping over the group, not just comrades like Doc and Ranger, but also Sarah, Emma, and the local drivers like Red, Slim, and Eddie, who had turned Sunset Oasis into an unshakable community. The sound of the motorcycles now vibrates the wooden floor, so close it's shaking the coffee cup on the counter, like a drum signaling an unrelenting battle. Doc raises the radio again, his voice more urgent but still controlled. They're here. Carver 15 motorcycles just pulled into the lot, 2 SUVs 100 meters behind. I see Sledge leading the pack, and there's a guy in a suit stepping out of an SUV, tall, silver-haired, doesn't look like a biker at all. John nods, a glint of triumph in his eyes as he hears the news. Suit, he repeats. That's our biggest lead yet. Doc, keep the camera focused on that guy. I want his face clear on the video, every detail. Sarah took a deep breath, her gaze shifting to Hank. John, if it really is a cartel, we're up against something bigger than we thought. Do we have what it takes? John turned to her, his voice deep but strong. We have what it takes, Sarah, because we're not fighting alone. They've got numbers, they've got money, but we've got each other and we've got a plan. Get ready. This is a final battle. The doorbell jangled as Sledge shoved the door open, his heavy boots thumping on the wooden floor, followed by Viper and 14 other Black Vipers, each armed with crude weapons, iron chains, baseball bats, hammers, and knives. Old man, Sledge bellowed, his eyes blazing with fury as they locked onto John. You think you got away last time and that was it? This time we brought the whole gang. Sunset Oasis is ours, and you'll be begging me for mercy. He let out a raucous laugh, the hoarse sound echoing through the bar, while Viper stepped closer to the counter, the chain in his hand whirling like a snake ready to strike. Sarah screamed as planned, her voice breaking with genuine emotion. Her hands raised her head, but the phone still recording. The lens pointed straight at Sledge. "Stop it. Take whatever you want. Just stop," Emma hissed, running behind the counter and crouching down, pretending to hide, but she held her phone through a gap, capturing every move of the bikers. John stood up, stepping between Sledge and Sarah, his eyes calm yet challenging, like a seasoned soldier ready to face his final enemy. "You want Sunset Oasis?" he said, his voice steady but carrying an undeniable weight. "Then go ahead and try to take it. But I'm warning you for the last time. You're heading down a road with no way out, Sledge." Sledge smirked, raising his dagger, the steel blade glinting under the light. "You're out of tricks, old man. We're gonna smash this place and you too." He signaled, and Brick charged forward, smashing the baseball bat into a nearby table, shattering it to pieces with a sound of splintering wood. Viper threw a chain at the coffee machine, but John quickly raised his hand to stop it, his voice as cold as ice. "Don't rush," he said. "You want to destroy? Fine, but I promise, everything you do tonight will be nails in your coffin, and those standing behind you as well." Doc's radio crackled from behind the counter, his voice whispering over the airwaves with a hint of excitement. Carver, the guy in the suit, just walked in, tall, silver hair, wearing a black suit, looks like a big shot. He's standing outside, and the camera got a clear shot of his face. John nodded slightly, his eyes not leaving Sledge, but inside he knew the big fish had arrived. "Take it easy," he said to Sledge, settling back at the counter as if inviting him, his voice tinged with sarcasm. "But you should know, you're not the only one here tonight." The front door opened again, and a man in a black suit walked in tall, with silver hair and eyes as cold as ice, the demeanor of someone used to giving orders rather than getting his hands dirty. He scanned the bar, his gaze stopping on John with a faint, emotionless smile. "Are you Carver?" he asked, his voice deep but full of authority, carrying a hint of someone who once controlled an entire empire in the shadows. "You're messing up my business, buddy." John gave a faint smile, the first time tonight showing a hint of triumph, his eyes locked on the suited man. Salazar, the name Sledge had accidentally blurted out in anger earlier. "I didn't mess anything up," he replied, his voice calm but sharp as a freshly honed blade. "You're the one who messed up by picking the wrong place to cause trouble. Salazar, you think you can stand behind this crew and keep your hands clean? Tonight, you'll see how wrong you are." Sledge turned to Salazar, his eyes flickering between anger and confusion. "Mr. Salazar, let me handle this guy," he growled, brandishing a dagger and ready to charge. But Salazar raised his hand to stop him, his gaze fixed on John, the faint smile on his lips now colder. "Not so fast," Salazar said, his voice deep like a veiled threat. "I want to see what he's got before we finish this." "You say I'm wrong, Carver? Then prove it." John nodded, his gaze unwavering, like a soldier ready for the final battle. "Just go ahead," he said, his voice calm but full of challenge. "But I promise you, this ending won't be what you expect." The smoke from Ranger billowed up from the parking lot, accompanied by the shouts of the Black Vipers as they triggered the traps, causing the air in the bar to tremble violently. The final battle had begun, not just between John and Sledge, but between a resilient community and a criminal empire on the brink of collapse. The air in Sunset Oasis shook violently as Sam Ranger Jackson's smoke screen erupted from the parking lot, blending with the panicked screams of Black Vipers as they stumbled into the set traps. Inside the rest stop, the fluorescent lights flickered on the ceiling, illuminating the cold face of Salazar, the man in the black suit who had just entered, his icy eyes scanning each person as if assessing his prey before striking. Sledge stood beside him, the dagger in his hand still raised, his eyes blazing with anger but now mixed with a hint of confusion as Salazar held him back. John Carver sat at a counter, his demeanor calm like a seasoned soldier on the battlefield, his gaze locked on Salazar, unwavering in the face of the man's powerful presence. Salazar smirked, a faint smile on his face that showed nothing but cold confidence. "Prove it, Carver," he repeated, his voice deep like a veiled threat. stepping closer with the gait of someone used to controlling everything from the shadows. "What do you think you can do with this rundown joint and your trashy drivers? I've built an entire empire that you'll never understand, and Sunset Oasis is just a small point I need to expand further." He stopped a few steps away from John, his icy eyes staring straight at him as if trying to pierce through. John nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving Salazar for a second. "I understand more than you think, Salazar," he replied, his voice steady but as sharp as a freshly honed blade. "I've hunted empires like yours from Texas to South America, networks that seemed unbreakable, but they all have one weakness. The leader always thinks he's invincible. You walked in here tonight, and that was your biggest mistake." He took a sip of coffee from the mug on the counter, the motion so calm it was almost taunting, as if there weren't 15 black vipers and a crime boss standing in front of him. Sledge roared, unable to stand John's calmness. "Mr. Salazar, don't listen to this guy anymore. Let me slit his throat right now." He lunged forward, the dagger aimed straight at John's chest, but Salazar raised his hand to stop him again, his voice icy cold. "Take it easy, Sledge," he said. "I want to hear him out. I enjoy watching guys like this dig their own graves before they fall." Sledge gritted his teeth, stepped back, but his eyes still blazed with fury, the dagger twirling in his hand like a caged beast. Sarah Coleman stood behind the counter, her hands trembling slightly as she continued filming, the phone's lens aimed straight at Salazar and Sledge. Her voice cracked according to plan, but this time there was a hint of real fear when she saw the man in the suit. "Please, take whatever you want, just don't hurt us." She raised her hands to cover her head, but her eyes stole a glance at John, silently hoping he knew what she was doing. Emma Grayson crouched behind the counter, her phone also recording through a small gap. Her voice screeched in terror, part acting, part real. "No! Don't come here," she cried, but her eyes brightened when she saw Salazar confidently step into the trap John had set. John turned to Salazar, a hint of sarcasm in his eyes. "You want to hear me out?" he asked. "All right, let me tell you what you don't see. You think you've got the whole Black Vipers gang and 2 SUVs full of goons out there, but you don't control them as much as you think. They're fierce, but dumb, and you just let them drag you in here, where you've got no way out." Salazar furrowed his brow, a flicker of doubt in his eyes, but the faint smile never left his lips. "You talk a big game, Carver," he replied, "but you're forgetting one thing. I don't need to get out. I've got money, people, power. You're just an old driver in a rundown diner." The smoke outside the parking lot billowed up again, accompanied by the screams of Black Vipers as they fell into Ranger's trap. Viper turned to the window, the chain in his hand stopping its spin as he roared. "What the hell are those guys out there doing? Are you letting someone mess with us?" Sledge rushed to the door, looked outside, his eyes wavering as he saw his gang in disarray, one guy rolling on the ground because of small spikes, another coughing from smoke. "Mr. Salazar, they got someone out there," he yelled, turning back with a voice full of anger. Salazar turned to Sledge, his gaze colder than ever. "I told you to control this crew," he growled. "If you guys can't get the job done, I'll handle it myself." He stepped closer to John, his voice lowering into a direct threat. "You got people out there, huh? No problem. I've got enough muscle to crush you, even with a few cheap traps." He signaled toward the window, and one of the 2 SUVs flashed its headlights, lighting up the parking lot as if to show off their power. John gave a faint smile, the first time tonight revealing a hint of triumph. "You think those SUVs are going to save you?" he said. "You just walked in here, Salazar, and you brought your whole empire with you. Everything you say, everything you do tonight is being recorded." He nodded slightly toward Sarah, and Salazar turned around, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes as he saw Sarah clutching her head, but still holding her phone pointed at him. "What?" Salazar roared, stepping toward Sarah, but John quickly positioned himself between them, his gaze cold yet defiant. "Don't touch her," he said. "You want to crush us? Go ahead and try. But I promise every punch you throw tonight will be a knife stabbing back at you." Sledge charged forward, not waiting for orders from Salazar anymore, his dagger aimed straight at John. But Big Bill Henderson suddenly stepped out from the back door, the wooden plank in his hand smashing hard against Sledge's arm, causing the knife to drop to the floor with a sharp clang. "No one touches Carver," Big Bill roared, standing next to John like a wall of meat. Tommy Reed followed, holding a steel cable, his eyes bright despite a slight tremble. "If you want to fight, fight us first." Tommy shouted, his voice shaky but determined. Doc's radio crackled from behind the counter, his voice excited. "Carver, the local drivers just brought in 3 more trucks to the lot. Red and Slim are leading them. They heard the news and rallied more people." Salazar turned to a window, his eyes darkening as he saw the headlights of 3 new trucks shining onto the parking lot, causing even more chaos among the Black Vipers. "What's this?" he growled, turning back to look at John. "Did you call all these people here?" John shook his head, his eyes lighting up as he saw that his community had gathered, now larger than ever. "I didn't call them," he replied. "They came on their own because this is their home, not yours. You want to crush us? You'll have to crush an entire community, and I promise, you're not strong enough for that." Sledge picked up the knife, charging forward again, but Ranger's shotgun blast rang out from the parking lot, knocking a Black Vipers guy down right in front of the door. Salazar raised his hand to stop Sledge, his eyes no longer as confident as before. "Enough," he said, his voice low but tinged with tension. "You want to play Carver? I'll show you how I play." He turned to the door, signaling to his crew in the SUV, but Hank Larson's police siren wailed from I-70, closer than ever, making the air in the bar vibrate intensely. John stood still, his gaze locked on Salazar. "You've made your move," he said, his voice calm yet full of authority. "And you just lost." Dawn breaks over Sunset Oasis, the first rays of sunlight piercing through the thick fog, shining on the parking lot now eerily quiet after a long night rocked by the roar of motorcycles, smoke, and angry shouts. Inside the diner, the air is no longer heavy with the fear or tension of the battle with the Black Vipers and Salazar. Instead, there's a warm sense of relief mixed with the pride of those who had just survived a fight that protected not just a restaurant, but an entire community. John Carver sits at the counter, holding a now-cold cup of coffee. His gaze fixed out the window where the morning light slowly dispels the darkness that once shrouded this place. Sarah Coleman stood behind the counter, wiping a smudge of dust off the wooden surface, her eyes lighting up as she looked around the ravaged yet resilient room. Broken chairs, shattered plates, and scratches on the floor were no longer signs of defeat, but evidence of a greater victory. "John," she said, her voice low but full of emotion, "we did it, we really did it. The Black Vipers are gone. Salazar's been caught, and everything's changed." John turned to her, giving a faint smile, the rare kind he only showed when he knew he'd accomplished a mission. "We didn't just do it, Sarah," he replied. "We did what no one thought was possible. We didn't just protect Sunset Oasis. We sent a message." Emma Grayson walked over from the doorway, her phone in hand with the final video from last night's battle. The footage showed Salazar being handcuffed by the police, the Black Vipers disbanding in chaos, and a local driver standing firm beside John like an unbreakable wall. "I still can't believe it," she said, her voice trembling but her eyes sparkling with joy. "We got it all on tape, every word Salazar said, every threat from the Black Vipers. Hank said the state task force has enough to take down their whole organization." John nodded, setting down his coffee cup. "Great job, Emma. That video isn't just evidence, it's our story, the story of everyone here." Hank Larson walked into the front door, his police uniform crumpled after a long night, but his eyes sparkled with a rare hint of satisfaction. "Carver," he said, his voice hoarse but firm, "the task force just reported that Salazar spilled everything. He's a big lead from a Texas cartel, using the Black Vipers as pawns to control rest stops along I-70. Thanks to Sarah and Emma's video, we've got arrest warrants for dozens more, not just here, but across 3 states. He placed his notebook on the counter, looking at John with deep respect. "But this isn't just about making arrests, you've done something much bigger." John shrugged, a flicker of pensiveness crossing his eyes. "I didn't do it alone, Hank," he said. "I was just the one who started it. Everyone here is the one who made it happen." He turned to look at the group gathered around the counter. Big Bill Henderson and Tommy Reed stood near the back door, their hands still dusty but their faces beaming. Red Miller, Slim Watkins, and Eddie Torres sat nearby, sharing a pot of coffee like comrades fresh from a battle. and Mike Doc Sullivan and Sam Ranger Jackson stood outside the door, checking cameras and traps, their eyes glowing with the pride of those who had fought alongside John. Sarah stepped closer, her voice deep but warm. "Hank's right, John. We didn't just beat the Black Vipers or Salazar. We showed everyone that a small place like Sunset Oasis can stand up to anyone. I heard Red saying that other joints along I-70 are asking us how we did it. They want to learn from us." Red nodded, slapping his hand on the counter with a resounding thud. "That's right. I just talked to a guy at a bar near Lincoln. They want to form a group like ours, to protect their place from gangs like the Black Vipers." Slim leaned in, his voice low but firm. "I've got some friends in Kansas City. They said if we can pull it off, they'll give us a shot too. No one wants to live in fear anymore." Eddie smirked, raising his empty beer bottle in a toast. "We're no heroes, but if we can make guys like Salazar shake, then anyone can." John listened, his eyes gradually lighting up as he realized what they had started wasn't just going to stop at Sunset Oasis. Doc walks in, holding a radio, his voice full of excitement. "Carver, I just heard from the special ops team on the radio. They're raiding one of Salazar's warehouses in Oklahoma. They found tons of contraband enough to supply 3 states for a whole year. It all started here, from this little diner." Ranger follows him, a shotgun slung over his shoulder, a hint of astonishment in his eyes. "I used to think we were just protecting a rest stop," he says. "But now the whole area is talking about Sunset Oasis, about how a bunch of regular folks took down a cartel." John stood up, his eyes scanning the crowd in the bar, his voice deep but powerful like a final declaration. "That's the real legacy," he said. "Not catching Salazar or driving out the Black Vipers, but showing everyone they don't need to live in fear. They thought they could crush us because we're small, but they don't know that when a community stands up, no empire is big enough to defeat it." He paused, a flicker of regret in his eyes as he remembered his days in the military, but then they brightened with faith as he looked at the people around him. Sarah nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I never thought Sunset Oasis would become an icon," she said. "But now I see it's not just my place anymore. It's for all of us." Emma hugged Sarah, her voice choked with emotion. "We did it because we believed in each other, John. And now everyone else will believe it too." Hank nodded, patting John on the shoulder. "I'll report this to the state team, but I bet this story will spread far beyond I-70. You've changed the way people think about standing up to these guys, Carver." The sunlight streaming through the window illuminated the rubble of Sunset Oasis, but now it was no longer a sign of destruction. It was a symbol of victory that transcended a mere roadside diner. John sat back at the counter, his gaze fixed on the parking lot where Red, Slim, and Eddie's truck stood like steadfast sentinels. "We didn't just win a battle," he said, his voice deep yet resonant. "We started a movement, and that's something that will outlive all of us." The atmosphere in Sunset Oasis cools down, transitioning from the peak of victory to the warmth of a new beginning, leaving behind a legacy that's not just their story, but a beacon of hope for anyone daring to stand against the darkness. Thank you for joining us on the incredible journey of Sunset Oasis, where John Carver and a community of people stood up, turning fear into strength to take down the Black Vipers and an entire criminal empire. From Sledge's punches to the resilience of Sarah, Emma, and drivers like Red, this story is proof that when we unite, nothing is impossible. If you feel that fire, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the next inspiring stories. We deeply appreciate your support. You are the driving force behind us telling stories like this. See you in the next video. Stay tough, stay proud, and see you soon.